C'est dans ce sens que lorsque nous prenons par exemple le volet de l'orpaillage, votre thème en dit long sur l'employabilité des jeunes en milieu rural, beaucoup de nos jeunes se retrouvent aujourd'hui sur les sites artisanaux de production, dans des conditions les plus pénibles. C'est peut-être ce qui s'est passé en Europe ou en Amérique dans les années 1800, lorsque les hommes rentrent eux-mêmes dans des galeries, qu'ils creusent eux-mêmes pour sortir le minerai. Nos jeunes continuent de vivre cela, au péril de leur vie. Nous essayons aujourd'hui de moderniser un peu. C'est à l'issue de ça que nous avons créé donc la SONASP, une société qui va se permettre de pouvoir exploiter et de commercialiser nos substances précieuses, notamment l'or.
What if Africa's vast wealth, plundered for centuries, was finally returned to its rightful owners? What if the gold that built Western empires, gold that was taken from the African soil, was repatriated, and the power it brought with it was used to build up African nations? In a bold, groundbreaking move, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the leader of Burkina Faso, has sparked a continent-wide movement to reclaim Africa's gold reserves from France and the United States, signaling a dramatic shift in the global power balance. This isn't just about reclaiming precious metals, but economic sovereignty. For decades, African nations have been trapped in an exploitative cycle, their wealth extracted while their people remained impoverished. But now, with Traoré leading the charge, Africa is challenging the long-standing systems of colonial financial control. The demand for gold repatriation is not just a political stance. It is an undeniable demand for freedom, for Africa to finally claim control over its resources. As this movement gains momentum, the West, specifically France and the US, find themselves in a state of panic, desperately trying to hold on to the economic dominance they've long taken for granted. But the question is, can this movement succeed? And more importantly, what will it mean for the future of Africa and the global economic order? Let's find out. To understand why the demand for gold repatriation is such a revolutionary act, we must first examine the long history of exploitation that has defined Africa's relationship with the West. Africa, a continent rich in natural resources, has been the target of systematic plundering for centuries. But this exploitation didn't stop with the colonial era. It evolved into more insidious covert forms, where Africa's wealth was essentially held hostage in Western vaults, depriving generations of Africans of the chance to thrive. One of the most egregious examples of this economic theft is the CFA franc system. Introduced in 1945 under French colonial rule, the CFA franc was a currency that pegged the economies of 14 African nations to the French treasury, making them financially dependent on France long after the colonial period ended. The CFA franc system ensured that these nations couldn't control their monetary policies. But that wasn't the worst part. These 14 countries were required to deposit 50% of their foreign exchange reserves, including gold, into France's central bank as a guarantee for their currency's stability. Imagine this: an entire continent, rich in gold, diamonds, and other minerals, being forced to hand over half of its wealth to a foreign country. This wasn't a mutually beneficial agreement. This was a financial system designed to make sure that Africa stayed subservient to the West. While these African nations struggled with poverty and underdevelopment, France amassed vast reserves, all thanks to the gold and wealth that rightfully belonged to the African people. The story doesn't end there. Beyond the CFA franc system, the International Monetary Fund (IMF) and the World Bank took Africa's wealth in a more covert, yet equally damaging way. The IMF and World Bank, institutions largely shaped by Western interests, imposed stringent financial programs on African countries. These programs often came with the requirement that African nations store their gold reserves as collateral for loans, which would never be repaid. Africa's gold, crucial to its economic development, was effectively locked away in foreign vaults, controlled by the Federal Reserve in New York. Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. For decades, African nations were forced into debt traps by these global financial institutions. Countries like Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, countries rich in natural resources, were made to accept high-interest loans in exchange for the very reserves that should have been used to build their economies. The gold was taken, the debt piled up, and Africa was left impoverished, while the West thrived off the continent's resources. These nations were paying for loans with their wealth, yet they remained dependent on Western aid and loans to survive. But Africa wasn't the only one bearing the brunt of this financial exploitation. The US and European powers knew exactly how to turn these resources into profit, all while keeping Africa in a perpetual state of economic dependency. As part of the IMF and World Bank agreements, African gold reserves were sent to the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, where they remained as collateral for the loans. No strings attached, no repayment in sight, just a locked vault with Africa's gold sitting untouched, while Western powers reaped the rewards. This strategy was brilliantly designed to not only disempower African nations, but to ensure they remained indebted to Western financial systems. Financial dependence became the chain that kept Africa from rising. The resources were still being taken, but now they were taken through financial agreements, making it much harder for the average African citizen to see or understand the damage being done. Instead of direct colonization, Africa was enslaved by economic systems designed to bleed the continent dry without a single soldier on the ground. But this wasn't just a consequence of bad policy or poor governance. This was deliberate. It was a systematic effort by the West to ensure that Africa would never be allowed to gain economic power. The global economic structure was set up in such a way that African countries couldn't use their natural resources for their benefit. Even as African nations became independent, the financial levers were still firmly in Western hands. This led to a perpetual cycle of debt and dependency, where the gold, oil, diamonds, and other resources that could have fueled African development were instead funneled into the coffers of Western nations. The impact of this system can still be felt today. Africa is home to 30% of the world's mineral resources, yet it remains one of the poorest continents on Earth. Despite its wealth, Africa's economic development has been stifled, and much of its natural resources are still extracted and exported with minimal benefits to local populations. This is the legacy of Western exploitation, the same exploitation that Traoré and his allies are now working to dismantle. What Captain Ibrahim Traoré's demand for gold repatriation represents is not just a return of physical gold. It's a symbolic and material rejection of a long history of financial servitude. The gold reserves that were stripped from African nations and locked away in foreign banks are not just economic assets. They are a reminder of Africa's stolen potential, of what could have been had African nations been allowed to control their resources and build their futures. Reclaiming these assets is about breaking the chains that have bound Africa for so long. It's about taking back control, not just of gold, but of Africa's destiny. And this demand for gold repatriation doesn't just stop at financial systems, it challenges the very foundations of global inequality. Traoré's movement is a confrontation with the long-standing systems that have ensured that Africa remains poor while the West remains rich. It is a call to action for African leaders to reclaim what is rightfully theirs, to reshape the continent's future by using its wealth for the benefit of its people rather than enriching foreign powers. In a world where African leaders have long struggled under the weight of external control and economic dependency, Ibrahim Traoré stands out as a beacon of resistance and bold action. Since taking power in Burkina Faso, Traoré has not only challenged the colonial financial systems that have kept his country and much of Africa trapped, but has also set a new path forward, one that demands sovereignty, independence, and control over Africa's natural resources. His actions, dramatic and audacious, represent a seismic shift in African politics that resonates far beyond Burkina Faso's borders. At the heart of Traoré's revolution is a call to reclaim Africa's gold reserves from the vaults of foreign powers. The gold repatriation movement is not just about retrieving physical gold, it is about dismantling the economic structures that have held Africa back for generations. But Traoré's agenda goes much further than that. In his quest for true independence, he has taken swift and decisive action, expelling French troops, terminating military agreements, and even nationalizing key industries, including gold mines. These bold steps reflect an uncompromising vision for the future of Burkina Faso and Africa at large, one where foreign powers no longer call the shots. One of the most significant and symbolic actions taken by Traoré was the expulsion of French troops from Burkina Faso. France, which has maintained military presence in former colonies across Africa for decades, had long claimed to be an ally in the fight against insurgents. However, many African leaders, including Traoré, saw these forces not as protectors, but as reminders of a colonial past that has never truly ended. The presence of French soldiers in Burkina Faso, along with the continued influence of French-backed military agreements, was a stark reminder of how France still maintained its grip on African affairs, even decades after independence. By expelling French troops, Traoré signaled a new era of independence for Burkina Faso. This wasn't just a tactical move against foreign military presence. It was an emphatic statement about Africa's future. Burkina Faso, under Traoré's leadership, would no longer be beholden to France or any Western power for its security or governance. This is a bold defiance of the neo-colonial structures that continue to dominate Africa's political landscape, especially when it comes to military and economic intervention. It was an act that immediately resonated with other African nations, many of whom were similarly frustrated with the long-standing influence of former colonial powers on their soil. Beyond the military expulsion, Traoré has also taken critical steps to assert economic sovereignty. One of the key moves in his agenda has been the nationalization of Burkina Faso's gold mines. These mines have long been controlled by foreign corporations, which have extracted Africa's wealth with little to no benefit for the local population. The profits generated from the country's rich mineral resources have mostly flowed out of the country, leaving Burkina Faso with little to show for its wealth. The nationalization of the mines is not only a significant financial maneuver, it is a declaration that Burkina Faso will no longer allow foreign corporations to exploit its resources for their gain. By taking control of these gold mines, Traoré has redirected the profits back into the hands of the Burkinabe people. The move marks a crucial step in his broader vision for economic self-reliance and independence. In a continent where resource extraction often leads to exploitation rather than development, this is a radical departure from the status quo. For the first time in decades, Burkina Faso has the potential to use its gold reserves to fuel its development. Whether through investing in infrastructure, healthcare, or education, or by building a more diversified economy that doesn't rely on Western-backed financial systems. This action has drawn praise from other African leaders and movements who see it as a game-changer for the continent. The idea that African nations should own and control the wealth beneath their soil, rather than handing it over to multinational corporations and foreign governments, is something that has been long debated but rarely implemented. Traoré's leadership is giving hope to those who have long believed that Africa must break free from the shackles of exploitation and take full control of its resources. But Traoré's vision for a free and independent Burkina Faso doesn't stop at military or economic action. One of his most groundbreaking decisions was to erase the country's $4.7 billion debt. In a world where national debts often dictate policy and suppress economic growth, wiping out such a significant amount of debt is a radical move. This decision sends a clear message to the international financial community. Burkina Faso, and by extension Africa, will no longer bow to the demands of the IMF and World Bank, institutions that have historically tied the hands of African nations with crippling interest rates and unsustainable repayment plans. Erasing such a massive debt is not just about freeing up funds for development. It is a declaration of financial autonomy. By shedding the weight of debt, Burkina Faso is signaling to the world that it will not be held hostage by the financial systems that have kept it down for so long. This move empowers the country to make decisions based on its interests, rather than those dictated by foreign creditors. The significance of this debt clearance extends beyond Burkina Faso's borders. It serves as a blueprint for other African nations who are trapped in debt cycles and unable to invest in their future because they are constantly paying off loans. Traoré's example demonstrates that it is possible to break free from these financial chains and take charge of a country's economic future. What's more, Traoré's actions are inspiring others across the continent. As Burkina Faso challenges the Western financial order, countries like Mali and Niger are joining the fight for gold repatriation and economic sovereignty. This Pan-African movement is gaining momentum, and its reach extends beyond financial concerns. Traoré's leadership has shown that it's possible to act decisively, and break free from the cycles of dependence and exploitation that have defined Africa's relationship with the West. Ibrahim Traoré's bold actions in Burkina Faso have not just transformed the country economically and politically, they have sent ripples across the globe, challenging long-established power structures and altering the trajectory of Africa's engagement with the rest of the world. His demands for gold repatriation, the expulsion of foreign military forces, and the nationalization of key industries represent a significant shift in the global geopolitical landscape. The effects of these moves extend far beyond the borders of Burkina Faso, as they are resonating throughout Africa and even sparking intense debates in Western capitals. For centuries, Africa has been treated as a resource-rich but politically weak continent, one that could be exploited for its gold, oil, and minerals without consequence. The West, particularly European and American powers, has long regarded Africa as a place to extract wealth without regard for the welfare of its people. But as Africa begins to awaken to the reality of its vast potential and wealth, the balance of power is starting to tilt. And in this shift, Ibrahim Traoré and his revolutionary movement are emerging as the leading vanguard for Africa's sovereignty. As Traoré and his allies push for gold repatriation and other sovereignty measures, the political implications of their actions are becoming increasingly clear. Africa is no longer content to be a passive participant in global geopolitics. Under the leadership of figures like Traoré, the continent is challenging the traditional power structures that have dominated international relations for centuries. One of the most profound impacts of Traoré's movement is its alignment with the BRICS nations: Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. The BRICS alliance has long advocated for reforms to the global economic system, seeking to break the dominance of the US dollar and create a more equitable financial order. The push for gold-backed currencies, a move championed by countries like Russia and China, is gaining traction in Africa, where nations like Nigeria, South Africa, and Egypt are aligning with the BRICS countries to challenge the Western financial hegemony. Traoré's call for gold repatriation is perfectly aligned with the BRICS agenda, as the movement towards gold-backed currencies threatens the stability of the US dollar. By demanding the return of Africa's gold reserves, Traoré is not just addressing economic injustice in his own country. He is contributing to a larger, more strategic push to create a multipolar world where Africa can play a decisive role. In this new order, Africa's vast reserves of gold, oil, and other resources will no longer be seen as commodities to be exploited by the West. They will be assets of global power. This growing alignment with BRICS nations signals a major shift in global politics. For decades, Western powers have viewed Africa as a subservient region, one that could be manipulated through aid packages, debt traps, and military intervention. But as African nations begin to reclaim their resources and align themselves with alternative power blocs like BRICS, the West is being forced to reconsider its strategies. The geopolitical shift initiated by Traoré and his allies is not only about gold reserves or economic independence, it is about the broader rebalancing of power. Africa's resource wealth has long been the foundation upon which Western economies have thrived, yet the benefits of this wealth have never trickled down to the African people. By demanding that gold reserves be repatriated and taking control of local industries, African leaders are signaling that the continent's wealth will no longer be extracted to fuel foreign economies. It will be used to build Africa's future. The growing economic sovereignty of African nations like Burkina Faso has the potential to disrupt global financial markets. Western powers, particularly the US, have long relied on Africa's natural resources to fuel their economic growth. But with the gold repatriation movement gaining momentum, the flow of African resources to the West may start to reverse. The idea that African nations can leverage their gold to create an alternative financial system or even challenge the US dollar's dominance is an idea that is gaining steam. If successful, it would mark a paradigm shift in the global economic structure, one that would change the way the world views Africa, and one that would allow African nations to play a much stronger role in shaping their futures. The bold actions of Traoré and other African leaders have, of course, not gone unnoticed by Western powers. As the demand for gold repatriation grows, and African nations begin to break free from Western economic control, France and the US have resorted to a variety of tactics to maintain their influence. The French government has already begun to cut aid to Burkina Faso and Mali, two countries that have moved to reclaim their gold reserves. These cuts in foreign aid are a typical response from Western powers when they feel their influence is being threatened. It is a clear message: comply with our economic control or face isolation. But these Western tactics are not new. They are part of a long history of neocolonialism, where Western powers continue to use economic leverage to control African nations. The manipulation of aid, the imposition of debt, and the backing of unpopular regimes have been tools used to maintain dominance over Africa for decades. The recent actions of France and the US are nothing more than a return to these tried and tested methods. However, Traoré's leadership signals that Africa is no longer willing to accept these tactics without resistance. With the rise of BRICS alliances and the growing desire for economic sovereignty, African countries are beginning to reject the traditional forms of manipulation that have kept them in a state of dependency. The challenge for Western powers is that they can no longer take the African continent's resources for granted. Africa is starting to demand respect, and with figures like Ibrahim Traoré leading the charge, the world may be witnessing the dawn of a new African renaissance. Do you think anyone can stop Africa from changing? Can the West be the master? Let us know in the comment section. Will Africa unite for a bigger purpose? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If so, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: the Black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious Blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.